So our group is going to be talking about the study of phrenology, a pseudoscience including the study of the shape and the size of the skull. We will be talking about the key people and the influential people, the basic ideas, the main ideas, the methods and evidence, and the criticism received, and why it is regarded as a pseudoscience. Hi, my name's Lauren, and I'm going to be talking about the intro today. So, phrenology, the study of the shape and size of the skull, is a pseudoscience created to determine personality traits, character, and mental abilities. The bumps, or shape of a person's skull, was used to assess people's personality traits and was used to justify inaccurate or wrong claims about somebody's personality. The theory of phrenology was first developed in the 1700s by Franz Joseph Gall, a German physician who was brought up in Strasbourg, Vienna. He believed that the brain was the organ of the mind, along with the characteristics of the brain connecting with different traits. Additionally, indents in the skull were studied as different parts of the brain and were assumed to measure how intelligent somebody could be, along with some other personality traits, like if they were joyful, if they were extroverted, or if they were shy. However, when phrenology was studied further, it was proved to be falsified as a science and regarded as a pseudoscience. Lacking the empirical support of its claims, phrenology's theories didn't have any scientific research approaches or consistent methods of its approach, as well as any connection between parts of the brain and specific traits or criteria formulated for the theory. Therefore, phrenology is a well-known pseudoscience based on its unprovable traits and examinations to understand the brain and its connections with personality, traits, character, and the brain's ability to control mental abilities.
Hello guys, I am Harman. Today I am going to talk about key influential people of phrenology. The first one being the origin of phrenology is Franz Joseph Gall. He was a German physician. He proposed that specific brain regions regulated traits like courage or compassion. He argued that larger regions controlling dominant traits cause bulges on the skull. The second one was the refiner of the phrenology. It is Johannes Physium, disciple of Gall, who expanded and refined Gall's idea, saw phrenology as a tool to improve self-awareness and add humanity. He played a pivotal role in spreading phrenology from Europe to America. Moving on to the George Combe, he was the philosopher of phrenology. He was a Scottish lawyer who integrated phrenology into discussions about human nature. He authorized the Constitution of Man, exploring how phrenology could guide societal progress. His work generated controversy by linking skull maps to human development. The last one being Orson Square Fowler and the Lorenzo Niles Fowler. These both two were American advocates. They were the prominent figure in the American phrenology movement. They opened clinics, published books, and gave lectures. They popularized phrenology as a tool for self-improvement and life guidance. There was a huge impact on broader disciplines. While phrenology is no longer considered valid science, but its advocates' passion and effort influence psychologically and criminology. They spark curiosity about the connection between mental processes and the brain structure, leaving a lasting imprint on cultural and scientific discussion in the 19th century. In, in the end, guys, I've added a punchline legacy. Phrenology might have been all bumps and no brains, but it left behind a legacy that's hard to ignore. Literally, just feel your head. It inspired curiosity about the mind. Even it was basically 19th century personality quizzes, but with skulls. Surely, we no longer judge needs to find the perfect spouse or decide who gets a job. Imagine your boss rubbing your head instead of looking at your resume. But we can thank these neuroscientists for kickstarting the idea that what's inside our mind can be evaluated differently than assessing what bump is on our skull. Turn out the real discovery was the improvement in neuroscience we developed throughout the time. Thank you so much guys. That was my presentation for phenology.
Hi, I am Husnpreet and here I'm talking about basic idea and assumptions of phrenology. Firstly, I'm talking about core concept. Phrenology aimed to connect specific brain regions to personality traits and mental abilities. It also proposed that brain was the center of mental functioning. with distinct areas responsible for traits like memories, bravery, and benevolence. Brain and skull relationships. Franz Joseph Gall theorized that the stronger trait caused specific brain areas to develop, leading to bumps on the overlying skull. Bumps and indentions on skulls were believed to reflect an individual character and strength. Practical applications. Phrenology measures skulls to assess traits and capabilities. The theory influenced societal practices including hiring decisions, marriage compatibilities, and even legal judgments. The another assumption is legacy in neuroscience. It introduced the idea of brain localization, which is the concept that different brain areas have specific functions. Impact on psychology and neuroscience. It raised foundational questions about brain organization that contributed to the development of psychology and neuroscience. While no longer a valid scientific discipline, it influenced the way brain research evolved. The another assumption of phrenology is the shape of your head is equal to shape of your life. People thought your head shape could predict everything from career to love life. Is your love life as bumpy as your skull? Here I would like to talk about how theories gone wrong. Phrenology was a far-fetched theory, but no real science to back it up. Bumps on your skull do not equivalent to your strength and weakness. Phrenology was the idea that the brain ran your personality and skull bumps were the clue. The bigger the bumps, the stronger the traits, which was a theory. People chased their perception on it. In the end, they proved it was a pseudoscience, but on the positive side, it encouraged neuroscientists to keep researching and developing their knowledge on the brain.
Hi everyone, my name is Saloni and I'm going to talk about the main ideas behind phrenology. Phrenology was the study of skull shape and how it was believed to reveal mental traits and abilities. It was developed by Franz Joseph Gall in the late 1700s and gained significant popularity in the 19th century. Let's dive into the key principles and the ideas behind phrenology. Phrenology is based on six main principles which I'll briefly outline. The brain is considered the organ of the mind. Each mental ability is connected to the specific region or organ within the brain. The size of the organ was believed to indicate the strength of the related ability. The brain structure was thought to shape the skull, meaning the skull's surface could reflect brain's development. The mind was divided into unique abilities, each with its own organ. And finally, phrenologists claim that by analyzing the bumps on the person's skull, they could predict psychological tendency and personality traits. These ideas set the foundation for the field and fueled its popularity. Franz Joseph Gall was the main founder of phrenology, and his interest began in childhood when he noticed a link between physical traits and abilities. For example, he observed that people with prominent eye often had strong memories. From this, Gall concluded that specific brain areas control distinct behaviors and mental traits. He believed that the skull shape reflected the brain structure underneath. Gall divided the mind into 26 regions or organs, each connected to a different personality trait or ability. Originally, he gave these organs dramatic names like murder or theft, but his student later renamed them to reflect more general characteristics like combativeness or destructiveness. Over time, the mapping became more detailed, and phrenologists categorized traits like benevolence or self esteem into specific regions of the skull. Phrenologists believe that the size and prominence of skull regions determined a person's strength or weaknesses in those traits. For example, a bump at the back of the skull was associated with strong parental instincts, while a bump near the ears suggested destructive tendencies. Phrenologists used head-shaped tools and maps to measure these bumps and analyze personality. This practice became quite popular in the 19th century, leading to the creation of phrenological societies in major cities. It even influenced early biological theories of crime, suggesting that criminal tendencies could be detected and cured by reshaping the mind. Despite its widespread popularity, phrenology was ultimately debunked as a pseudoscience because it lacked empirical evidence and scientific validity. However, it focused on brain localization, connected specific brain region to function, paved the way for modern neuroscience. Today, we know that brain regions do have specialized function, such as the frontal lobe for decision making and hippocampus for memory. While phrenology got many things wrong, it contributed to the idea that behavior and cognition are rooted in the brain structure, which remains a key focus in neuroscience today.
It's Lauren again, and I will be talking about the methods and evidence used by Franz Joseph Gall and other phrenologists in the 1700s. So, a few methods and evidence tested by Franz Joseph Gall included palpation, cranial measurement, and lectures. So cranial measurement was a method used to measure the bumps, shape, size, and any indents in the skull. Similar to palpation, kind of, the theory associated with cranial measurement is that each bump corresponds to a brain organ that is associated with different traits. Cranial measurements were also known to try and prove that personality traits and characteristics were correlated with the bumps on a person's skull. For example, phrenologists had tested more extroverted and joyful people to see if they had specific indents or bumps in the same areas of their head. Despite a few correlations, Gall's findings were not planned out carefully enough to replicate, as further research proved that cranial measurements did not have anything to do with the brain's organs. Moving on to palpation. Palpation was the most popular and key method used in phrenology, which involved feeling a person's skull to determine skill traits and personality traits associated with the person. So they used their hands, tape measures, and calipers. Gall's theory, along with other phrenologists, including believing that the brain had several organs, each having a specific function. When feeling the surface of the skull, phrenologists stated that they were able to determine the development of the organs. To prove their theory, they would feel and measure the skull using their hands, tape measures, and calipers, as I mentioned before, and they would look for bumps and indentations on the skull to match with the personality traits it corresponded with on their charts. For example, Gall believed that large bumps above one's ears indicated that the person may be possessive or controlling. Its popularity had risen in France, Britain, Spain, and the US, Scandinavia, and Germany in the 1830s, making it a popular and interesting study, as well as helping to inspire the research of the brain. The evidence Gall tried to prove was the information collected based on people's skill-based traits. Gall and other phrenologists collected information by analyzing people with prominent traits like athleticism, or their ability to write, or even their ability to write music or play music. They measured their heads for bumps and indents. Then they tried to correlate different people with the same traits with the shape of their skulls, and although there were a few correlations that matched, they were not proof of evidence, disproving their theories because of lack of evidence and experiments. And finally, the last method I will be talking about is lectures. So additionally, Gall had one last method to prove his findings and theories on phrenology. Gall had used lecturing and his ability to publicly speak around the world to prove his methodologies. In 1791, Gall had traveled around Europe to give lectures about his groundbreaking research on phrenology. And as well as it may have enticed some people, including the royal family, his views were not admired. He lectured around the continent about different parts of the brain and how parts of the brain had different organs. all with different functions and correlated with different abilities and personal qualities. Gall desperately tried to prove his theories and methodologies by lecturing and using his findings as an example, which only further confused other scientists. He then became chastised by the church and reprimanded and ridiculed by them, leading him to be restricted from speaking in public because of his unsupportable and debatable views.
Criticism of phrenology's approach. Gall's theory was based on personal evidence, mainly from his own family, rather than in-depth scientific testing. He would test his entire family and take them into the living room and have a consultation with each of them. He would continue to shave their heads and to feel around their scalps and give them each assessments. His approach was extremely biased, focusing only on confirming his own beliefs rather than exploring all possibilities. Social and scientific harm. Phrenology supported harmful racial and sexist stereotypes, claiming that African Americans and women were less intelligent due to their skull shapes. Gall's ideas were used to justify social hierarchies and encourage racism, which was including promoting slavery. This modern study highlights the discrepancy between phrenology's outdated methods and under-researched scientific theory, approving its status as a pseudoscience. First, Franz Joseph Gall, the founder of phrenology, would introduce himself to the client and talk about what they're going to do today and make sure that he got consent to doing their assessment. After that, he would start shaving their head in order to really get in there and to see the bumps and to see the shape of his skull to do a proper assessment for his clients. Once the client was prepped, he was able to observe the skull. So Gall believed that the shape of the skull reflected the underlying brain structure. To begin, he would closely examine the surface of a person's head, looking for bumps, depressions, and irregularities. These features were thought to correspond to different areas of the brain, each responsible for a particular mental function or personality trait. He would feel the skull, using his hands to identify any prominences or bulges. He also associated specific areas of the skull with certain characteristics. For example, bumps on the forehead were linked to intelligence and reasoning abilities. The shape of the temples could indicate tendencies towards empathy and social skills. In the end, he would develop something called a phrenological profile. He would combine his observations of the skull with his knowledge of the corresponding mental facilities. He might create a profile for the person's mental abilities, character traits, and personality based on these findings. In conclusion, Gall refined his approach by conducting further studies and comparing his findings with the actual behavior and characteristics of individuals. However, it's important to note that many of Gall's conclusions were based on subjective interpretations and lacked empirical evidence. Thank you for listening.
So, to conclude our presentation, phrenology, the examination of the skull, has been primarily discredited by contemporary science. Since it was created in the 18th century by Franz Joseph Gall, phrenology quickly rose to prominence as it was presented as a seemingly scientific method for comprehending behavior. Nevertheless, phrenology's techniques lacked a foundation in empirical research and subsequent scientific process, especially in psychology and neuroscience. It demonstrated that the principles were erroneous. The dimensions and form of various sections of the skull did not correspond with personality traits or cognitive skills as phrenology suggested. So further looking into the research, phrenology played a role in perpetuating detrimental stereotypes and was frequently exploited to rationalize discriminatory actions. Basically to excuse people's bad behavior. And although phrenology holds historical significance for grasping early concepts regarding the brain and personality, it is invalid and has no relevance in contemporary science due to the lack of experiments in correlation with the experiments. Its main value today is in emphasizing the significance of strict scientific approaches and ethical factors in the study of human behavior, intelligence, and the study of the brain. Phrenology represented an initial effort to associate different brain ideas with personality characteristics by analyzing skull shapes and protrusions. And although it was well known in the 19th century, it was debunked and currently regarded as a pseudoscience, as I mentioned before, because of its lack of evidence. Although it sparked initial concepts regarding brain function, phrenology's techniques were not scientifically rigorous and were prejudiced, frequently upholding racist and sexist ideologies. Contemporary studies on the brain indicate that cognitive functions are distributed throughout the brain, instead of being confined to particular regions within the skull. So they couldn't find very much correlation between certain bumps on the skull and personality traits. And even with its shortcomings, phrenology impacted psychology and ignited enthusiasm for the scientific study of the brain.